I'm April Callis-Birchmeier, and welcome to my LinkedIn Live. Happy to talk today about employee engagement in change management. And I think this is a really important topic. I'm excited to talk about it with you today. And I think it's a very, very appropriate thing to talk about today because it's the week of Thanksgiving. And because I am feeling very thankful for all of you who are attending our LinkedIn Live sessions, I'm also very thankful for the opportunity to really assist employees during change management projects and initiatives in staying engaged with their employer and with each other and with the mission and purpose and vision and value of their company. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about employee engagement in change management. It's important to think about employee engagement. If you were to look at a graph, imagine, if you would, that you have a timeline, and you have the timeline is at the, well, I'm stopping for a moment just because I have to admit something to you. I have a cold today. I've been trying to kind of muscle through my cold, but I feel kind of like I have cobwebs in my head. So I'm excited to talk about something that's very meaningful to me. And I just wanted to make sure that I recognize and that you recognize that sometimes things don't always go well, even in change management. And the goal, I think, is to keep our employees engaged with us as an organization as we move through a change. I feel like it's really critical. It's an important piece. Now, what happens many times during a change is that people feel lost. They move from their current state where they feel very connected to what they do to a transition state. And in this transition state, they just don't know quite what to do to feel like back to normal. And I think it's incredibly important for us to know this and to really pay attention to the stress and the frustration and the cobwebby headedness that people sometimes feel during change. So I wanted to spend time talking about the things that we can do to help people in this transition. Because our goal is to get people from the transition state where they feel a little bit confused, nothing is quite like it was previously, and help them to navigate themselves and to navigate through the organizational structure into that future state where the change happens. When we reach that future state, that's when we can start to realize the benefits of the change. So if you've been watching any of the LinkedIn Live videos over time, you are probably familiar with the READY framework. And I always feel like the R of the READY framework, the relevant and relatable story of change, is so meaningful to our stakeholders. It's also meaningful to our sponsors to help them explain the change and to help them really internalize that change for themselves. I think sometimes our sponsors get a little bit of a short stick in the sense that we expect them to do an awful lot of work without always ensuring that they are completely engaged and really understand the change at a deep level in a way that they could tell in a story. So when I'm thinking about how to engage employees during a change management effort, first thing I want to think about is that transition state and how lost they may feel. Because one of the keys of thinking about change management is understanding that it happens on two levels. It happens at the organization level. So the organizational level is where we are moving structures, we're designing processes, maybe we're replacing a system and doing things very differently from what we've done before. And then the personal, individual level is me. It's how I feel as an employee. It's how I feel as a stakeholder in this change. And I need to go through a mindset shift. So just as the organization needs to make changes to policy or procedure or practice, our process, We are making a lot of systematic organizational shifts. There also needs to be an internal individual shift where I decide that I'm going to change my way of working, change my mindset to move through that transition state and make it to that future state. Not everybody can do this. It's not guaranteed that we can help every single stakeholder make that shift. And there's a lot of reasons why. Sometimes stakeholders are feeling like they've been through a lot of change and they just don't want to make a mindset move anymore. Sometimes our stakeholders just are having a very difficult time understanding that future state, that new world, and are therefore unable to realize the benefits of the change. But I think one of the key pieces that we must keep trying is how to engage and connect with stakeholders. And again, that's why I like the relevant, relatable story of the change and what it means. So if we think about our stakeholders, we have our individuals who are affected by the change, anybody who's impacted by the change. And then we also have, in addition to our stakeholders, our sponsors. And our sponsors must be visible and active during the change. But sometimes our sponsors are struggling with this as well. So supporting them as a change management professional means that I'm giving them a lot of tools. And I'm helping them to see the different components of the change and how they will impact individuals so they can help their teams, their leadership teams and their managers teams and their employees in general make that shift, make that move. And so this is an important piece to really understand that sponsors have a responsibility for the change. I think it's right in the name, right? They have a responsibility. And stakeholders are impacted by the change. So they're two different groups, but they both have a vested interest in making it to the future state to realize the benefit. So one of the things, one of the plans, one of the strategies, one of the preparations that I'm doing. So when I am evaluating change impact and organizational readiness, I'm looking at stakeholder engagement. I'm looking at how does this organization usually reach out to stakeholders? How do they connect with stakeholders? One of the things that I also am paying attention to when I'm looking at my stakeholders is I also want to really divide them into specific groups. And I like to do this at a relatively granular level. I like to put my stakeholders together by how they will be impacted by this change. There are a number of different ways that we can put together stakeholder matrices, and one of those is that we can identify influence versus impact. And that is a good tool to use, but for me, I prefer to use a stakeholder identification assessment that asks questions about what will our stakeholders gain from this change so that I'm on top of what they're going to be gaining. I know what that is. They know what that is. What will the stakeholders be losing from this change? We know there's always loss when we have change. And what do our stakeholders fear? Because fear turns into resistance many times. And if I don't address fears up front, they can come back when I'm close to adoption, when I'm almost up that hill of adopting the future state, making it to the future state, adopting this change. I can get this resistance, which sometimes are these emotional responses of fear. So then I want to think about, how do I determine, how do I gauge stakeholder participation? Well, once I've done my assessment, I build a strategy. What exists in the organization currently that helps stakeholders engage? And engage means to connect, to be connected to the change. Not just have heard about it, read about it in an email, but recognize how they are actually connected. So I think about this connection piece in my strategy, and then I design a plan for how I'm going to connect. Now, for example, if I were going to do some change in a school environment, I think about my stakeholder groups, right? I have students in a school, I have teachers and staff in a school, I have principals in a school, I have parents as part of the school. We have neighbors are kind of part of the school ecosystem, the townspeople, but I'm going to really focus in on those stakeholders who are directly impacted, which would be students and parents and teachers and principals and staff. And then I want to think about how can I work with each one of those groups to engage them in the work that they need to do to make the mindset shift and to understand the process and policy change or procedural changes that are coming with this change. So maybe, for example, with my student stakeholders, maybe I would engage them in having a field trip to their new school if we're doing a school reconfiguration. Maybe I engage them by having them go on a bus ride to practice how to ride a bus. Or maybe I have an assembly where each of them has the ability to participate in some way to recognize that this change is occurring. If I had parents, I would definitely have a town hall meeting with parents. I'd also want to maybe give parents a scavenger hunt or some other activity that they could do, that they could involve their students in also, to really get prepared for this mindset shift of moving to different schools. Um, Teachers, I think, also need to be engaged. Teachers would really have to have a great understanding of what exactly will be changing for them. And then, of course, our staff and our principal would need to also really recognize what's changing and perhaps do some walkthroughs, tours, guided sessions with the teachers to ensure that all of them are engaged. Now, that sounds like a lot of work, but I have to tell you that this work is worth doing because when our stakeholders are engaged, they understand what's happening and they're able to make that mindset shift and they're able to adopt the change. So I think it's really important to recognize that we want to think about engagement as forms of participation. How can we help people participate in the change? Um, I've been working recently with some healthcare clinics that are very interesting, uh, especially because some of the clinics have decided to engage their stakeholders by giving them a piece of responsibility for their healthcare. So giving them access to a portal, perhaps, where they are able to kind of do an e-check-in and complete some of their paperwork online so that they're fully engaged. And when they come to their physical appointment, they are connected already. They have already spent time, they've already participated in their own care. So it's important to recognize that this ability for people to be involved and to do something, to take action towards something, is really necessary. One of the things I like to do also when I'm engaging employees or any stakeholders in change management is I like to think about what are they keeping? What are they not losing? What gets to stay the same? And sometimes that's a great activity when we have some sort of a departmental or stakeholder group meetings. Having an activity where we can identify the things that won't be changing is really reassuring to many. I think that we also have to be smart about the different stakeholder groups and what they might need. I mean, a stakeholder group such as maybe the townspeople, they might not need much engagement. They may need some communication, a feedback loop for questions or to clarify anything. But it's those stakeholders who are closest to the change that need the most engagement. So one of the challenges, I think, is to keep engagement going through a long change. And it can be really difficult because there are times when you don't want to, even though you have your relevant, relatable story of the change, you've engaged your sponsors to lead the change, and you're working on advanced communication to communicate about this change. There's also sometimes pieces of the change that are coming later, and we're not ready to reveal the entire picture. And that can be a little bit tricky. It can be tricky because we want to give small bites. We want to give people enough to chew on, to engage with, to be participating in, and not have to worry about a year or 2 years or 3 years down the road. We want them to just look ahead. And at the same time, I think having a framework of that describes the change in stages, that describes the change over time, I think is also important. If you can leverage that, if you can develop that story about this is step one, we have more to go when we get to the end of this portion of the journey, and then we'll move into step or phase two. But that could be a long initiative. And so for engagement, sometimes we need to break it down and build it out into small bites. You know, I've always been somewhat confused by that example when people say, well, you can't eat an elephant in one bite, because I kind of wonder about who eats elephants. But I think that it's a true saying, like you can't do everything at once. You have to do things step by step. And engagement is a step-by-step process because it's built with trust. We have to be able to share with our stakeholders how they can participate in the change, and the fact that we keep the promises that we've made in communication, in training, in process redesign, in thinking through new ways of working. When we've kept those promises, we build that trust, and that trust goes a long way. And so we want to continue to build this trust and continue to add more engagement opportunities to our long-term initiatives so that people don't get worn out. And so that we have some breaks built in. You know, let's make it to this goal, and then we'll all have a little break, and then we'll move on to the next. So I think that's important to recognize, that the momentum of engagement can take us through a very bumpy road, but the investment you make in building trust, I think, is the thing that makes the road smoother as you move along the journey. I think that stakeholder engagement, many times we have a strategy, a plan, and then we execute stakeholder engagement. And sometimes it's a little bit confused with the communication strategy and communication plan, the execution of the communication plan. And one of the things that I have found is that if I'm working on a small change, you know, maybe it's very complex, but it's involving a smallish number of stakeholders, maybe 100 or less. I found that I will sometimes build the engagement participation piece into that communication plan. But if I have a larger, more complex change, I'll keep those out, break those out separately so that we have those in separate places. But whatever format, whatever process you use to determine how you're going to share this information, whether it's a strategy for engagement or a strategy for a communication plan with engagement involved, the key is to ensure that you're really thinking through, what can the stakeholders do? What can they do? Action is the antidote to despair. And many times in a change environment, if we don't give our stakeholders action to take, they can fall into despair. They can get stuck in that transition state. So I think about this, and I know that maybe every stakeholder doesn't need to log into a system and look around. Maybe every stakeholder doesn't need to take a bus ride across town. But maybe every stakeholder does need that, because they need action. People need to do something to help them make it through this transition and change that mindset, move into that new way of working, move into the new process, the new future state. And to do that, we have to give them something to do. Sometimes we can give them a lot of training. That training is very helpful. Training is doing, it's learning. And so I would encourage you to avoid a lot of video tutorials that you watch and don't actually do anything at the end. I think if you have video tutorials, there should be breaks. People should work on something, maybe have a live Zoom session where we can have a small group activity to give people the chance to apply and to be active in their own learning. And in our training plan, I think about, building in engagement opportunities, not only in the engagement plan, but also through the training and then also through our support. So that's what I've been thinking about with engagement. If you are working on a change and you have an employee engagement issue or question, I'm very happy to talk. I'm very happy to connect and give you some brainstorming, some thoughts about, how could we engage particular employees. I know that even giving our students the opportunity to, create art around their change is a way to engage. So anything we can do to promote action, anything that we can do to help measure and help determine the engagement activities of our stakeholders is worthwhile in helping them to move toward the future state and realize the benefits of change. So again, as I mentioned, I'm very thankful that we have Thanksgiving this week. I'm very grateful to have you all here. I'm looking forward to hearing from you about your ideas on engagement and how to help stakeholders engage with a change so that they are connected to it, they're able to move through it. I think one of the fears that many of us have when we're in change management or working through a change, project managers who are implementing change, I think one of our fears is resistance, but I honestly think resistance is an opportunity for engagement. It's a place where we can look and we can say, I see that I see that our groups are engaged, are not engaged, they're resisting. And even resistance is an engagement opportunity because people are connecting. They're unaware, they're unhappy, they're not thrilled. They might be saying no way, but it is something that's happening as opposed to folks who are just kind of on the sideline, not against, not for, just sort of out of the game. So be grateful for those resistors also, because the resistors are showing up and telling you, hey, something isn't going down right with me, and it gives you a great opportunity to figure out what it is, why it is, and how to help people move through this mindset shift as well as the organizational change. So happy Thanksgiving. I'll see you 2 weeks from now for another LinkedIn Live.